and welcome to the Remembering and Reenchanting podcast. My name is Sara Jolena Wolcott, and I am your hostess on this sacred learning journey of unraveling, unveiling, and becoming more fully alive at the end of the world as we know it. In this podcast, we offer up to you, dear listener, 3 forms of episodes to support your journey of remembering and reenchanting. First, conversations with amazing people. Second, storytelling. And third, myth casting. In this episode, we're going to bring you a conversation between myself and another amazing, fascinating leader in the areas of remembering and reenchanting. Welcome to the Remembering and Reenchanting podcast. My name is Reverend Sara Jolena Wolcott, and I am your hostess. And today we're going to do something a little bit different than what I normally do. I frequently have really amazing people coming into the studio, and we have these beautiful conversations talking about all sorts of insightful and empowering things. And then sometimes I talk, I share audio, I share stories just from myself. I share effectively what I think of as an audio essay or piece of ministry. And today we're doing something that's a little bit in between those two. And I've invited my friend Gayano into the studio. So thank you so much for joining us here, Gayano. And you're in Wales.
I am.
Yeah. And I've had the honor of knowing Gayano for several years now. And it felt right to reach out to you for this particular episode, for this conversation. It was just a reflection on 2025. As some of you know, I have been doing circular time reflections for a good 8 years. Every year I offer these annual circular time reflections, which is a process of turning the linearity and some of the craziness of and disconnection of our world into a space of greater wholeness, to return ourselves back to the cycle of life and the cycle of the earth circling around the sun, spiraling around sun, and sun spiraling within the galaxy. And we have a particular process that we use, all of which is geared to support, each step of which is geared to support our return in our capacity to experience our own wholeness as ecological beings, as political, economic people, and participating in bigger political economies beyond our individual selves, and yet very much influenced by our own agency, sometimes in small, sometimes in large ways. And the wholeness of our relationship with spirit and with one another and our families and our personal lives. And so I've been doing this every year, and of course I do my own reflection as part of it. And this year is the first time when I really feel this nudge to bring some of my own reflection outside of our small group spaces, and into a wider space, to kind of share a bit more about some of my year, as one tiny part of this great big planet. And because so much of this is work that I don't think can or fully should be done all by ourselves for any of us, and that includes myself. Part of why I've invited Gayano to share this space with me is so that this can be partly a conversation. So I am sharing from my 2025, and Gayano and I are going to kind of go back and forth in a bit of a conversation about some of what I've experienced and noticed. Yeah. So I just that's like the big headlines. And Gayano, I'm just wondering if there's anything that you want to share as we get started here today.
Thank you. I've got a couple of images. When I first met you, it was on you were offering something with, oh my goodness, his name, Dougal. And it was very unusual for me to see that you were offering something, can't remember what it was called, and to follow up and to do the homework. That's not a usual thing for me. So I kind of knew something was ripe. And I was super grateful. And I was super intrigued by just the way of you showing up. You were standing, you were moving. I began to recognize you as someone who, I guess it's something about the words that you were having to bring didn't mean that you had to sit still with a still body, and it was a relief for mine. And then the other image, I'm now recalling probably 5-6 years ago, whenever we sat with you on the circular calendars. And that was after we'd begun our work with you on rememberings and the significant gifts of that. But it was a real beauty. And I remember April being here, a friend, busy trying to actually make physical calendars. As it was super inspiring to just be alongside the invitation to slow down, and it brought to my attention all sorts of ways of thinking about what I'd lived through. It was articulated through the sense of a circle of the months, and that's it. I'm really grateful that you've decided to hold this as a conversation, because not everybody will sign up for a circular calendar event, and yet they're exquisite, and it's special, a kind of way of bearing faithful witness to what we've lived through, and a marker in the sand as we proceed into new beginnings. So thank you.
Oh, these times are living through us, and we are living in these times, and that's a somatic experience. And so, when we're talking about the past, and we're talking about the present and the future, and the slippery way that time has with us, of course, we often need to move ourselves and our bodies. And I think that, in the Quaker tradition that I grew up in, and in many ways is still so important in my life, and has so many teachings for me, continually has supported me. The quaking was one of the early signs that Quakers discerned the movements of the spirit. But I think there's within that, there's a recognition of the somatic nature of spirituality, and of how spirit moves in this very somatic way. Yeah. And of course, there's many ways of expressing all these things. So, where should we begin, having begun?
I was just pondering on that, so here we are in 2026 with all that has already started. And we're attempting to kind of take aspects of ourselves, yourself, back. One of the things I remember you saying about this year, there's some very pivotal experiences that not lived through your body before in this way. And, I guess that's for many. One of the things, I was at a friend's where we've got a big roundhouse, and the floor is made up of 12 segments. And I suddenly realized, we're on a living circular calendar. So just standing on January was actually the sitting down, trying to remember, activated nothing but standing in each month. I was awed by the waves of awareness and reflections that came up. So whether you got a point in the calendar that is most up for you to be standing, or whether we go month by month, I don't know, you will.
Right. Yeah. Let's start with January. So we are standing in January, quite literally.
That's the new.
And then maybe we can go from January into themes, because I feel like so much of so I think it might be more enjoyable to listen to some of the themes than a month by month view per se. But um, so in January of 2025, and we do, as some of you know, we do these embodied circular calendars. We do these, my partner and I lead these. My partner, Krissy, who I'll be talking about a fair amount in this today. We do these. We call them circular time rituals, and they're in person. We don't do them online. There are lots of things I do online, but I don't do these online. And you sort of walk the cycle of the year. And we did one this past winter solstice here in Hudson, where we live, at the Hudson Harmonic, just like this old new space that a friend has recently revitalized. And when I was preparing for it, I will often walk people through a chronology of the year. And I realized in order to do that effectively this year, that would take like so long. Like I couldn't, it would take me a long time to prepare like 2 events per month or per because so much happened. In a way, it's like lots of things are always happening. A lot happened this year. But I did January, and that actually felt really helpful. So when I was, working on my own calendars, like January started off for me personally with the birth of Krissy's second grandbaby. And, Krissy and I have been together for 5 years now. This year was our 5-year anniversary, which happened much later in the year, but that's so this is our kind of our 5th year in relationality, and my relationship with her family. I did not, I did not raise her kids with her. Her kids were all grown people by the time I entered relationality with Krissy. And so to come into the birth of a grandchild of your partner's family is just, it defies words. It's certainly momentous and amazing. And I have never had my own children, and I had never been at a birth before. I'm not a birth worker. And we live in a society where birth is so protected, which in some ways is really positive. And other ways, it's like so many people just don't have any experience of birth unless it's for their own child, right? So it's not like so many parts of life that liminal space is removed from us. And so Krissy had never been to a birth that wasn't for her own birth, so for her 4 children. And I had never been to a birth at all. And we actually got to be in the room. I was in the room for most of the time. I kind of stepped out for the last part. It actually felt a bit too intimate. It asked me to, but it felt like I needed to step out at that moment. And so I got food for everybody, which was, very important and useful thing to do. And I could feel, I could feel some of the ancestors gathering at that time. And that was just, for anyone, I think that's just such a special space. And I had such respect for birth workers. And for everyone going through the process of birthing and parenting. And Krissy also started her new job. She's been working for it's called the School, Regenerative School. She's sort of one of their 3 staff people. And she it's her first time working at a full-time job. And she had seen, and this felt important to mention because she and I had really, both of us for different reasons, had seen the need several months ago to shift what we were doing, to kind of shift some of our financial pieces, to shift some of the ways we're bringing in money. And she had been doing contract work as a restorative justice practitioner. And she saw that the work that she was doing was changing. And this had been several months prior to January. And so that really influenced her saying yes to this particular position. And it was her first time having a full-time job. And very quickly upon entering that job, she and the other, it's a small nonprofit, decided to realign the HR,
Yeah.
so that they would have each staff person could have 3 months off at any time of the year. And we didn't know this, of course, at the time. We had no idea how pivotal that would be. So 3 months off of paid leave at any time for any reason over the course of the year, preferably with notice. And preferably not everyone would take paid leave off at the same time. And it was a very radical move in many ways. It's not, in some ways, like it is what a lot of schools do, right, with their teachers, right? So it's not unheard of, but it's as a structure for an organization that some people will get 3 months of paid leave. But it ended up being one of the most important things that happened this year, as I'll share shortly. There were the fires in Los Angeles, which felt like it really began. Gayano, your face just went like, whoa.
Well, yeah, of course. That was at the beginning of last year.
It's the beginning of 2025, right? Yeah, I know. I know. It's so much has happened since then, right? And it's both not a long time ago and already a year since that happened. And I have very strong connections in Northern California, much less so in Southern California. But I do know I know several people who were evacuated. I know 1 or 2 people who lost their homes. And I know, because one of my former students was actually, he was a former pastor, in a different town further north, who's several years ago, Paradise went through this huge fire. Like the whole town was flattened. Small town. But it was one of the first times when you could see the impact of climate change related fires. And so he and I were actually talking a fair amount. He's like, this is what happens afterwards. And he's like, if the city doesn't take these steps, this is what's going to happen. And he was one of many people who was trying to tell the city, okay, this is what you need to learn from our experience. And I think some people listened and some people didn't. And that was like, it was an ongoing thing. But I remember those conversations with him in January. And I had taken some downtime in January to do some book drafting and I was revising and publishing an Older Sugar article. And I was planning to do a lot of writing, and ended up, when Trump was inaugurated, what I felt, and at the same time I was listening to some Indigenous elders, a particular woman who I have come to, I knew her, I've known her, I've built a relationship with her over a couple of years now. And so something shifted for me in that January where I felt I could really listen to a lot of her audio recordings, and really learn from them. Like I was in a place where I could learn from her as a teacher much more substantially. And her name is Pat McCabe of Women's Sand Shining. And she gave a talk. She had given a kind of a dialogue, and I listened to a whole bunch of things she had done recently, a whole bunch of talks and conversations that she had recently had in January. And in one of those talks, she was talking about the importance of, after the end of a ritual, you take down the altar. And she was kind of talking about this generally, in this sort of general way. Well, actually very specifically about a particular ritual that she's a part of that didn't have anything really to do with what I was doing. I was not doing that particular set of rituals that she was doing. But she was speaking to this, I think, significant truth. And it just hit me when she said it. And around the time, and I was listening to this around the time that Trump was coming into office, and I just we need to take down our altars. Right. And so I literally took down my altar in my in my office space, which is one of my primary altars. I have several. And I took everything off and I sat in front of the empty altar. And I just let myself, I guess you could say, sense into the pattern that was unfolding all around me. And that with that came tears and wailings and loss and mourning, grief, and fear and anxiety, and some insights came in as well, some sort of knowings for myself. And we knew that Project 2025 was going to happen, even though no one said it was. At that point, Trump denied it. Since then, he has absolutely said that he's said yes, he has been following that book, which everyone saw very quickly. We had some inkling of what was happening, and I think even though we had some inkling, it was still the rush.
I'm aware that when I walked the calendar, I could literally viscerally feel, new things came up. So there's the what happened, there's the story, and then there's what's happening now as I hear myself speak to what's there. And that's where my attention went with you, just to kind of check in. Actually, I don't know that it's as simple as how, hearing yourself now, how is it? But it's something around that quality as you bear witness now. What's there on the surface, or on that somatic level, I guess?
I think I'll mention one more thing and then answer that, which is such a beautiful question. The other thing that happened in late January is that my ex-partner, who's quite a fair amount older than I am, went into hospice, and this was not surprising. We knew he was dying. He was dying from old age, effectively. And so him going into hospice was, as I said, it was not surprising. And of course, I could not have known then, but it would be, he would die a few weeks. He died in early February. And I spent quite a number, it was a good 2 weeks there when I would call him almost every day. I live in the Hudson Valley in New York, and he's in California. I called him most days for about a week or so. And we got some closure, or I got some closure. And that began, there were subsequently 6 major deaths in 6 months, which I could not have known then. All of which were important, all of which would have, all of which when I made the circular calendar every year, because you can't put everything in, but each of these deaths would have made it in. And I have had some significant loss before in my life. And this felt different, or at least these 6 deaths in 6 months. It felt like a kind of a stage of life, as well as a teaching, as well as an invitation to go deeper into death. And so death itself became a category in my year. Part of what we do in the circular time process is we look at categories. And so I look back now, like standing here in this January in 2026, I look back at that January, and I'm so grateful that I didn't just keep writing in that time period, that I paused and I did this clearing my altar moment.
Right.
And I just kind of let myself be with my own unknowing, and let myself honor, the bigness of what was happening in my country and amongst my people, and also the uncertainties, right? the extent to which I didn't know what would happen. I couldn't, there were the aspects that I could see and the aspects that I couldn't see. I don't just mean like I couldn't see all these executive orders, but what shapes and confluences and configurations, how would people reorganize themselves in the face of such destruction? What new forms of reorganizations might happen? And one of the things that Pat McCabe had said in these audios I was listening to that has stayed with me really all year, she said people keep asking, she keeps hearing people talking about the news story. What is the news story? What is the news story? What is the news story? And she says, well, maybe our focus should also be on, can we tell the old stories differently or better? And so since so much of my work is very much that, is telling history in different ways, and how can we relate to the past in a different way in order to create different futures? Like I was, some part of me was very satisfied to hear her say that, but it was also a reminder you don't always need to rush into telling these stories. And so I think I was able to enter this year with a lot of curiosity. And I have a relatively privileged position in the sense that I am not yet the primary target. I'm not to say that I won't become one. I think I might become one of the primary targets. It's very possible. There's all sorts of reasons why. But I am not in the moment. I haven't been having to wonder, if people are going to be snatching me off the street when I walk out the door. That has not this year been my concern. It might, and I don't say it won't, right? Very conscious of that. So from a position of relative privilege, I've been able to be curious about what might be created amongst as many things fall apart. And I think I was also, like there's so much that happened that month of January became kind of like the beginning of a story. Like when you, in a way that's unusual, that is not often true in January. But it was like, a chapter ended like in a book, or a book ended and the next book began. And the next book, like the introduction of the book told you, here's some of the main themes that are going to be happening this year in this story, in this book, the book of this year. And that's just, in my experience, really unusual. Like very rarely do we kind of get is a month is a month of January an introduction to the rest of the year. Like the year kind of goes all over the place, right? Sometimes like you don't get that often, but I looking back, I do feel that. And maybe some of that's just the human propensity to over narrativize or, over storytell sometimes. But, and in my year, I look at the month of January and again, I might just be picking out things, but, so much that happened that month does feel like it was reminiscent of the rest of the year. And I think about how much the world has changed since then. And the beginning of January, and I think one of the things when we were doing some pre-conversations about this, I talked about was like, there are so many assumptions that have been true all of my life, which are no longer true this year as a result of what's happened this year. And there are so many also elements that have also been true all my life, but I have paid less attention to until more recent years, that feel particularly worth paying attention to. So there has been tremendous change. And at the same time, I think one of the narrative questions that I hear people struggling with, and I've struggled with, has been how to talk about what's happening in a way that honors the extent to which things are not new and that some things that are new, that can combine a conversation about old patterns, very old patterns, and that integrates that with an awareness of some of what is new, and that can help us guide towards letting those old, either way, whether it's new or not new, to how do you move towards a life-giving society and system and personal set of things in life. So I'm going to pause there.
Yeah, thank you. Where my attention is something around, you've come to know that now, that the things that you could have assumed for the rest of your life has changed. And it's that sense of joining the dots backwards. And if I, in bearing witness to January, the beginning of January is a birth, and your presence in the energy of birth. And then the beginnings of a death, which turned out to be a death every month for the first 6 months, close up. But there's something about the stories. At some point, you can recognize, you kind of paused and poised yourself, that there was something that got enacted, maybe through the unexpected moment of taking down the altars. And I don't know at what point or in what part of the last year, or whether it's actually mainly living now, is that sense of, those assumptions, it would have been coming through the year as things were changing, but you come to know it now, live it, and that it sounds like you were poised to, you had enough in you to be poised to actually bear witness to that, to notice it, and to be able to continue in the presence of all the things that your life is asking, and at the same time recognizing everything's changing around you, and having capacity to keep walking with it, some kind of degree of wisdom, or being honed by what was asked of you in this last while. But that container at the beginning of January, this very strong step.
Yeah. And, like I've been doing this work of, we talk about as remembering and reenchanting and anticipation for a good 8 years. 2026 will be 9 years of running Sequoia Summon Via, and teaching about the histories of decolonization. Well, not really. Teach with the intersections between climate change and the doctrine of discovery, which is a type of relearning some of those histories, is a form of decolonization. And coming to, be in this deeper relationship of unsettling some of my own stories and my own positionality, and coming into deeper relationships with different Indigenous peoples of this place. All of those pieces have been with me for quite some time. And yet there's things that happened this year, and I think those only they happen in a moment, but they only really could have happened through those 8 or 9 or 10 or much, in some ways longer, 15, 20 years of preparation, right? There are things that have happened, and it's so common, right? Something happens in some ways in an instant, or just over a short period of time, and yet there's all this preparation before then. On a national level, Project 2025 took decades to write that. Right. The Heritage Foundation has been working towards a document like that for decades, longer than my lifetime. And they have been preparing for this longer than my lifetime. And the Christian nationalist movement, at least 2 or 3 generations, of particular attention towards, much longer, obviously. It goes back, you can trace the Christian nationalist movement today directly to the doctrine of discovery. It's the same thread. And it has, it's the way it is now. It's not quite the way it has been in the past, et cetera. But there's a bunch of similarities. And so much of what is happening now is as a continuation. And so we too, like all of us are being prepared for the times we're in different ways. And our interpretation of that and our understanding of that, I think, varies significantly. The lenses through which we see the world vary, obviously, quite significantly.
Mm. You called it a theme or a category, maybe, but death and grief is significantly part of this last year.
Mm. Absolutely. And learning to different ways of being with it, the beingness of how are we with what life gives us as well as with what we create. And in February, late February, I had the honor of attending the Rematriation gathering, which was hosted at the University of Syracuse, and hosted by the Rematriation group of Indigenous women.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the fear and anxiety that was very prevalent in February, even though everyone was kind of like in this progressive space that I spend most of my time in. People were very anxious, and I remember wondering how was this gathering of largely Indigenous women with an explicit invitation to non-Indigenous peoples to also attend and participate in this convening. How would they engage with these bigger political pieces? I think that was one. I remember that being one of the questions that I was curious about. And I took the train out there along the river, which is the train goes along the river, and the old way of understanding this land is through is through the waterways, like
Right.
many parts of the world. And one of my learnings has always has been to see the world through waterways, through rivers and waterfalls and lakes and streams and oceans, not just through land masses. Right, that's been one of my overarching shifts over many years. And because people have always, that's a very ancient way. It's not just indigenous to Turtle Island, but it's it's in Europe as well. Because water is always essential to life. So you always are thinking in terms of fresh water and salt water ways of engaging and eating and drinking. So I was watching the river as I was going to this gathering and wondering about these things. And it was when I remember I was also teaching in my remembering class because I've been able to keep the remembering courses going pretty steadily. And so I was teaching, and then I went into the gathering, and there was very little talk about what was what was happening in America in the way it would have been most other spaces. You would have felt it much more. And the focus was on, we are revitalizing our culture and our traditions, and we are healing and in various forms of healing and various forms of cultural revitalization, and engaging with our traditions and our power, and like the strength and the sense of peace and safety in that space, like it was like it was like a whoosh. It was a feeling that stayed with me all year. And it was, and seeing this very particular form of female leadership. And there's many forms of female leadership. And like kind of like being able to somatically be with this particular form of female leadership was so powerful, in which men played a hugely important role. and were constantly being supported and lifted up in various ways, right? It wasn't like a female dominated space by any scope of the imagination. And so much happened there that was just really meaningful and powerful, but there was just something like, oh yeah, like they are not centering the continuation of the domination culture. There is sort of like, okay, yep, that's what these rather this is what is happening over here. There's not a denial of it. There's no illusion, but the center is their own cultural revitalization. And it was a wonderful repositioning for myself to kind of feel that, oh, right. And with that comes the deep knowledge of like, oh yeah, no, the violence to this land and to people and to women has been going on in these lands for 500 years. Like this is just another aspect of colonization, another aspect of the doctrine of discovery, the violence, particularly towards Black and Brown people, so old and familiar, so familiar. And if like the different forms of misogyny, so familiar. And yet there's something much older and much deeper here as well. And that something in the bioculture of these lands is still here and continues to have its own form of thriving and is revitalizing now. And there were many things throughout the year which kind of helped solidify that for me and helped me go deeper into that and to kind of feel within myself that invitation to engage with, in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy cosmovision, the great white pine tree of peace.
I mean, I hear it as a visceral, palpable, lived, it's when your body lives through things. You could have people come back and tell you stories about it. But actually, it changes something. You see something that you don't unsee. And even though you might have known it might be in the atmosphere or remembered somewhere, to palpably have it live through. And, that's not just you going, it's you taking with you the places that you've been looking and working with all of these years, that makes something visible and palpable in your body, or not makes, but it's part of it being palpable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I right. And I think that I knew I had some students, one or two students of mine were there, and we did some reflection on it later, and it was and they all said that taking the Remembering course kind of helped prepare them for that moment. And I knew what they were talking about, and that isn't to discount anyone who, whatever, everyone has a different journey, and everyone's journey is, I think, valid. But like when you've done some of this work, then it does prepare you to engage more deeply. And to your somatic experience is different. And for me, I was actively working through some stuff mentally, and in relationality that I was able to work through. I was actually able to, some stuff I'm like, oh, this is some parts of myself that I want to release, that I want to be less guided by. And I was able to do so through that, a 2 or 3 day experience, which is, I think, the marker of a powerful spiritual convening, is that it works on people at this very personal level. For me, very, 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 very personal, as well as at these sort of, mesa and macro levels, as well. And I remember at the end of the gathering, and this also has stayed with me. They did a open thing where anyone could come in the community could come. They had different talks and little videos and some music in this big auditorium. And I was sitting up the sort far away from the stage and peering down. It was really fun. It was really, really fun to kind of see a good 600 or 700 people come and listen to these Indigenous women and some of the men who they brought into the space. tell a bunch of different stories. And one of the Mohawk clan mothers, she often goes by Mama Bear, was at one point she kind of said in a kind of in a way that she has where you're never entirely sure if it's just a joke or if it's completely honest and completely true. It was like a little bit on the border. And she said something I have heard her say before. And so perhaps because I heard her say it before, I don't think it's a joke. She says, well, when you get tired of your president and of what your country is doing, then you can always renounce your citizenship and join the Haudenosaunee Confederacy.
Gosh.
And the crowd just I think was somewhere between stunned and erupted in kind of like this, like, woohoo, and I later learned that this is something she said in various forms. I mean, I knew she had said it before, but she said it quite a number of times before. And I asked some folks who knew her better than I do. I said, do you think she's serious about this? And what does that mean? What would that look like? What would that entail? And they said, yeah, we don't know. We don't really know what that would entail. I don't know if anyone knows what that would entail. Like, but it was just one of those moments. There was so much about that. It was so beautiful, but one of those moments that was so remarkable and that stayed with me and still staying with me, obviously today, is like, oh yeah, there's multiple realities happening on this land. And what we have now is not what was, and it does not have to be. And there's, so much of like 2026 is the time in which is the 250th anniversary of the history of the founding of the Declaration of Independence, which my ancestors were very involved in. And it's like there's this moment in this year in 2026 to significantly re-narrate the founding of this country and to lift up Haudenosaunee and in many other ways other indigenous contributions to what this thing we call democracy. And that's not the prevailing narrative at all. By such a long shot, it's almost laughable. But like it's there. That doesn't change it. It's there.
I can almost feel it in you. And again, looking in the reflection back and in the experience of it, something becomes a possibility that was never a possibility.
Yes.
And it's not about whether you can see it out there. It's become a live piece in you that will keep working. Who knows what's possible? But that's like connecting last year into what's coming and something about seeding those possibilities, that they are ripe and they happen in all sorts of ways. And that, again, I'm hearing more of you of the last year of what it has poised you towards. And not that I know, therefore, what this year's going to look like through you, but I beginning to sense on some of the kind of rootedness or the threads that have been stirred that are being fed and with you in this as you come into this year on the back of everything from last year.
Yeah, and it creates new possibilities, like these old stories create new possibilities for this coming year. And that's true with so many things, right? And the subsequently in April when my partner lost her mother and her son both passed, that has shaped our year, has shaped our life in a way that I still don't have a lot of words for. I mean, I have words, but there's early words, and I will probably tell these stories in the future differently than I tell them now. I can feel that. I can feel the momentousness of it. I can feel I'm in the middle. I'm still in the middle of it. we're in the middle of this year of the first year of grief, which we now referring to also for Krissy in particular as a year of protection. And yet so much of what she is doing now, she launched a new nonprofit, Strawberry Wisdom, and that is coming, it's related to this loss, but it's also not about the loss of her son. It both is and is not. And because it's also the continuation of the work that he started, and even his loss, and he was such a significant person in the revitalization of the Tuscarora language. He was a language keeper and helped to revitalize the language. Played such a key part in the Longhouse, in the revitalizing of cultural traditional ways within amongst her peoples. Like all these pieces of work are so much bigger than any of the individuals doing them.
Yeah.
And they all are. And like when she talks about what her hopes for her nonprofit, it isn't that the work won't happen if she doesn't do it. It will, but this will perhaps add something to it. She plays a role. She's not denying her role, but the power of there's these movements that we're a part of, that we play these small parts of that are happening, and we can influence them and shape them. But there's a way in which there's an energy here that's not just about us. And that's true in so many ways, in so many different spaces. It's a little bit mind-boggling, really. And it's shaping for me to get to engage with that, with the community in the rituals, death ritual, is something that is continuing to change how I understand death and grief and peace and the great law of peace, that is still here. It is continuing to unfold in me.
I'm holding you in the reflections, you holding the work and the podcast and speaking to people. And it's not just unfolding in you. You are close up to something maybe you hadn't anticipated. You couldn't have known you were going to find yourself in the midst of such ritual and such kind of old story lived out present. It's not visible. It became visible to you for all sorts of reasons, and I guess through you hold a thread to those for whom it is invisible right now, but you're here testifying both of the visceral gift, growing, learning realness of it and its wake, the ripples that that they're part of the days of you, of Krissy, of the communities that gathered you in. As all of this, everything else is going on around you in a kind of mainstream view. That it just feels important to bear witness that things are really still living. They really are available.
Yeah, we can live into a different set of stories and different futures. And that promise has been here. The promise for people of European descent has been here since since European people first came to this continent, and it's been true for many other people brought by choice or by force, or by the many varieties in between. There is a deeper promise that is of an abundant life, and of a type of freedom that is only possible of an independence that arises out of connection and interdependence. It's not the other way around. Like there's a dignity that's possible in this land that has been here, and that the land and waters hold and the peoples hold. And there's a long way to get there. And we don't really know what it looks like. I don't want to say that there is not a 12-step plan that I'm aware of to get there, but there are pathways, and many people do and can and will continue to find them, right? And I, we had a powwow that you got to come with us to in October, which was such a delight to have you there. That was the first time.
It was an extraordinary. I mean, it's that kind of visceral experience. And I remember, or I called Krissy saying, these lands, these hills, these trees have not heard these drums for 200 years. And many things that moved me, but being gifted that insight or that kind of awareness has really stayed with me. It's that sense of remembering it's not just people bringing something, it is echoing something in the land that was familiar for generations and that had been gone. And because I wasn't, as I turned up at the powwow, I wasn't thinking about the land and the trees until somebody made it visible to me. And then the kind of visceral, like, of course. And that's one of the pieces I share often about that time, and many pieces, but that's a very pertinent, potent reminder to me as a human being of it's not just us living on the land.
It's not. And it's our it's learning again and revitalizing the old ways and learning new ways, both of interacting and of being in communication and respect and reciprocity. And it's like, and I feel like even though there's been all these learnings this year, there's all these sort of moments of like being drawn in and taken up and sometimes swirled around. There's also, and sometimes I've also been granted things I've wanted for a very long time, not the death stuff, but other pieces. I was asked to do a course on weddings and funerals, which was, I've been wanting to teach. I've been officiating weddings and funerals in an eco-spiritual key, honoring the divine feminine in various forms for a while, working with Christian and also other more than Christian traditions. And it's been a great delight. Weddings, funerals, baptisms, baby blessings, divorces, these major stages of life. Such a delight. And I've been wanting to teach it, and just kind of like haven't gotten around to it. And then, a friend of mine asked me to teach these 2 courses to some of her students. And I was like, wow, amazing. Like, and she didn't really know. It's not that she knew that it just made sense to both of us that she wanted her students to have some of this knowledge. And she asked me, and it was such an important moment, and then there was another, and now I have these halfway written booklets on the topic, and I hope to bring them to something that resembles good enough to put out there in the world this year. I have a lot of halfway written things from 2025, which I'm like, okay, who knows? Maybe some of them will come into more published spaces for 2026. And there are other things that I've wanted, like, I was asked to be a part of I was invited into bigger platforms or platforms I've wanted to be on. And then several of those platforms I really wanted for quite some time. I don't think I did a great job. Like once I was there, I think I kind of did so. I did like medium, and I was like, oh, I didn't know all these things I needed to know. So it was like, there was actually a lot about what it means to be in that space, what it means to step on that stage, what it means to be in front of that camera, that I didn't know, and I don't know if I could have known until it happened.
I'm struck by the courses coming around birth and death, and and this is in the year that birth has come physically, physiologically, palpably in your body, and death in many ways very close up, and not just death, but community ritual holding, and yeah, the longing for something, and then finding yourself there and realizing you're in the learning of being there. You're not being there, or you are being there, but there's a whole heap that's now visceral.
Yeah. And at one point, one of my themes, and I think it took me a while to realize this. I wish I'd realized it earlier. Was like, oh, there's a level of preparation and refinement that I need to do more of. Like, oh, there's this thing that I wanted requires certain preparation. It's like I didn't know what the preparation was. Oh, I really need to prepare to go up on that stage in a way that I wasn't preparing. And I was preparing in other ways. Right. It's like, oh, I'm doing this form of preparation and not that form of preparation. And then when I was like stepped away, I'm like, oh yeah, that didn't go so well because I wasn't focusing on like some of what I need to focus on. And for me, like, I have, the nature of my brain is like, I have a neurological divergence, cis multiple, and some of that's like foreground, background issue, and it's a gift, but it also means like what I pay attention to I don't pay attention to what everyone else pays attention to. Yeah. And that's a huge gift, and it's a huge challenge on my day-to-day life and sometimes professionally. And I'm like, oh, I need to do that different. Like, oh, this is what preparation looks like. Oh, these are the questions I need to be asking. Here are some of the things I can be. And so like, if those opportunities open up again, which I don't think I have complete control over, like, then I will have a better set of questions to ask.
Different
and
ideas.
yeah.
I'm curious about the learning in that. It's an amazing feedback loop. It's also, I don't know whether it's disappointing or perplexing, but there's a kind of visceral learning which is very different from what does being living a birth, living out the deaths, the rituals, the rematriation, council of women, all of those have a different kind of quality of learning, I think, than this is the thing I've shown up and I haven't prepared the right paper for it or something.
Right. There was a little bit of that, like, yeah.
But
or like, and even like there's a couple of times when I went to I don't know. Okay, ask your question again.
It was to do with how have you've managed that, or you've in the live learning. And I wonder to what extent have you had to wrestle with, I don't know, shame or just those stuff of life, of what it's like to finally get somewhere and then to realize you hadn't prepped a kind of simple thing.
Or not quite the right prep, right? I did one form of prep and not another. Yeah. Like it's
I'm curious about that kind of learning for yourself, which is a more
yeah. I mean, there were two moments like that where I definitely had tremendous shame about it afterwards. And it was particularly challenging because like it's not like most people watching or seeing or who were there would not have known, right? It was more like I knew. Yeah. Right? Like it wasn't, I don't know. Most of it wasn't wrong, but it's like, oh, but this wasn't what I can do. And this wasn't, it was wrong some of it was wrong. And like, oh, this is not an expression of what I stand for. I am expressing this other thing. There was one moment when I was expressing some kind of like aspects of colonization that I have learned not to in other contexts, but clearly not in that one. Like there's stuff that happens when there's cameras looking at you, or there's things that happen when you're on stage, and like it actually takes a certain type of practice and awareness to not get caught into some certain types of dominant ways of doing things.
Right.
And it also takes certain types of practice and awareness. Someone's like, oh no, I really should have done this X, Y, and Z, which is like, I just didn't quite see that. So yes, there is absolutely shame and embarrassment um, and also, but and one of my friends said, I was talking with a filmmaker about this recently, about one of these experiences. And she said, Sara, there is no way you can learn this until you're on a set.
Yeah.
She's like, I only know what I know as a filmmaker because I've been a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Right. She's like, I only know to ask some of these questions because I've like done some of this work for a while. And I think that, that's such an important piece of all of this, right? That's like, right. And it's like, I don't know if I'm going to be on a film set again. Maybe I won't. And that's, I think, one of the weird things in life. And like, I'm coming into like 9 years of doing Sequoia Samanvaya. One of the real huge satisfactions, like biggest for me professionally, has been the extent to which I have been able to improve what I do.
Okay.
And it's because I've been doing it for 9 years. Like, oh, like and like, those are all stretch moments. Like those are what I'm describing. They're places where I had very little experience, but in the teaching that I do, in how I talk about my material and how I work with my students and my clients and one-on-one work with people, the healing work I do, I've been able to improve, and I can see that improvement. My writing has improved. My newsletters this year, like, oh, I'm writing much better. And that's not just me saying this about myself. I've gotten a lot of feedback. Like, yeah, you're right. Like your newsletters are right on. And I'm consistent, right? I'm consistently I have a lot of consistency. Like this year we were able to improve the Remembering course, just in terms of just like, some internal, like within the course, to kind of like making things clearer for people. Refinement is like this. And that's because I've been doing it for a while. So in those places where I know and it's one of the satisfactions about circular calendars too, and working with the wheel of the year and working with any cyclical process. And most people have some kind of cyclical process that they're working with. It's like, there's ways in which you can improve. And then of course there's stuff that's like, oh, you don't know you're ever going to get that again. Right. Like and I think of this a lot for when I watch my people do child rearing. Like the second child is not the same as the first child. So yes, there's things you've learned from raising the first child, but the second, third, or fourth child, like some things you understand, some pieces, like, okay, this is where the dentist is, and this is how you manage the health insurance. And this is some logistical pieces, but every child's very different. And they ask different things with their parents, and the parents' lives have changed. And, so there's both a familiarity, but there's also, so every time is different and new. And it's like, so I think life is just like this, right? And so having some pieces that I feel like, okay, I am getting better at some of these things.
Well, it's clearly so, and obviously people recognize that in themselves and each other. But I recognize now I'm kind of re-inspired around the circular calendar, that sense in which, and I remember 2 years ago walking the 12 segment floor in the Roundhouse, just how rich it is to mark. And, I can easily not make the space to do so. Make the space. I can easily just not end up doing so. And it's those moments when there's an invitation and somehow it's ripe in me to set forth. And, I think part of your learning is the very visceral tracking through exactly what you're doing now, which you would normally be doing alone, and differently if you're doing it alone. Maybe you would be going through the months more in a clearer way and marking that, and you probably do that anyway. But
I mean, in our preparation for this, I'd done my own circular calendar 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3 different, because I was emphasizing different pieces of it, and pulling out, this year I pulled out a spiritual learning thread, because so much happened. I was being taught so much spiritually this year that I wanted to make sure I pulled it out.
Right.
And even defining what is spiritual learning and what is not spiritual learning became its own, very, very, very generative conversation in my head. That's been and amongst some other people as well, that's actually been a really helpful thing to give some thought to. Again, some of these we had to keep reconsidering. And then, when you and I were preparing for this, I journaled on this here. And it came to, or I wrote about this here in a way I don't usually do, again, because so much has happened, that feels so important to summarize, to look back at, to kind of look at for myself and for others and for the clients who I work with. Some things have shifted, and some of that's personal, again, to let it kind of look at the ecology, to let ourselves enter into that wholeness of it. And to see where our attention is being drawn and where is it being tended to and pushed away. And to recognize, the role of fear, right? And how do we respond to the rise of fear and the rise of different types of fear? And how do we respond to the rise of divisions and of different ways of seeing things, in which people look at the same thing and they see it from such different lenses, the same event with 20 gazillion, iPhone cameras watching the same incident. And yet the interpretations of that incident can be vastly, vastly different.
Yeah. And they're not, that's somehow not, even that they're not interpretations, that this is what somebody sees, depending on everything that they bring to what's looking at what they're seeing. To kind of be undone and humble in the face of such difference. And I was thinking, my attention was connected to these deaths, one a month for 6 months.
And it actually wasn't, they were actually very spread out over 6
right.
months.
Okay, it was over 6 months. Well, there's something about the presence to the work, whatever it is, but for you, including the circular calendar, that helps to not merge it all. I mean, there are a number of deaths this time. Yeah, this time last year, a friend died suddenly of flu. My brother died the next month. Another person died just on. There's something about how easy, I think, for me, or maybe many, for those to kind of drift or get coagulated, or to somehow be lost in the heavy year, and the visit, the finding oneself able to bring attention for a wee while, and bear witness to what you see as you join the dots backwards, as you kind of bear witness to where you are now, and track some of those actual visceral learnings of what it is to be an adult human in these days, with all the differences that
and what a friend of mine, and one of my students who took the circular time calendar this year, she reflected. So there was her mother passed, and her husband's I forget, parent passed within a couple months of each other. So they both ended up helping to clean out their respective family members. Both of them worked together to clean out their respective family members' homes. And she said at one point during our reflection on her year, she said, I have packed 40 boxes of unread books between these two households. And she's like, there's something in that she feels like there's something in this that is telling me something about books and about our relationship to books, and also what are we doing with individual libraries versus communal libraries, and like what does a community need in this? And it was and it was again, it's that visceralness of the 40 boxes of unread books, right? That has really stayed, just like this little detail, this little nuance that talks about this much bigger thing. And of course, that's why hearing each other's stories can be so important, especially around things like death and dealing with stuff, which is a huge piece of death. And Krissy and I were talking. I mean, we may or may not run a course someday or do some more thinking around what she calls got the morbs or morby work, around like how much we in America and much of the Western world are deeply institutional beings. We are caught up in institutions, whether or not how much we're aware of it. We're not always very aware of it. We're used to it, but we're in these larger medical, different forms of institutions, different people, different levels of engagement. So what is it happens when you die? Like to your bank account and to your credit cards and to your cell phones and who has access and like all the parts about working with these institutional dynamics, which took up, I said earlier that like it was so significant for Krissy to have, thank goodness she had those 3 months off. She took 2 months after her son and mom passed. And the fact that she had that time, that she didn't, to really like, not just to be with the death, but to do all the stuff that comes after death, to call the banks a gazillion times and to talk to the insurance companies and to like figure out the estate, which, in neither case was as easy as one might have thought it would be. For neither person was an easy process.
Mm.
And she, and like that was much of what she was doing, was just on trying to figure out the estate and deal with all the stuff, right, as well as her own grief and her own, we said, the family had like 1 or 2 brain cells between us.
Yeah.
But like that was possible because she had put into place in her organization, she and her fellow staff members had agreed that they were going to prioritize care of each other, and that was just how the organization was going to function. And the organization had a great year, and like Krissy played a huge role in that, even though, right, alongside of her taking 2 months out because she had to focus on her family. And so like even amidst these things, we can create structures and processes and stories to support one another and to hold one another. And we're in a really good position to be able to do that right now. I do think we're in a place where we can do more of that because there's more awareness of it. And we can play with structure.
I guess
Yeah.
you've lived that out between you this year. And, a lot of people listening to you, that would be one of those impossible thoughts. And, the great majority of people will be snowed under doing
Yes.
their everyday work whilst they're
Yes.
trying to phone the bank in the lunch hour or the evening or the afternoon. But then there's the kids to get to bed and the car to repair. And, but it's not just about those structures and whatever you maybe teach. It's also the way, how it's held, because many people won't have what you and Krissy have lived through.
Right.
Not the number of deaths, but also not the active, lived quality of what it's like to be held by clan and an old place-based way of living at some degree.
Yeah.
But that too, not but that too can be spoken to. It's not just because people can get support, or how do you file this and how do you do that, and depending on who shares that and how that gets shared is also part of it. That's part of
Absolutely.
the
Yeah. And I most organizations don't know that they can provide more, don't even know it's possible for 2 to 3 months of paid leave, right? Like, but I think I'm trying to lift up that there are these, that there are other ways of doing things, and they are not as far away as they may appear.
Yeah. And that's what you're holding the kind of thread to. You have actually
Yeah.
lived it.
Yeah, and I have lived it, and I have witnessed other people living it. And there's a lot of things in between. There's a lot of things that are not, it's not like so much is in between different spaces. Like so much of the 6 deaths I experienced, 2 of them were people who were part of a old clan system, and the other 4 were not. And and one of those who was not, Joanna Macy's passing. There were many other deaths that were important this year, of course, but I got to be at her wake, and she has been a teacher of mine, and was very influential in some spaces. I mean, some people have been completely lives changed by her work, and many people have never heard of her. And that funeral wake was just exquisite. And the community pulled together a ritual that was very much of her, very much of this particular Berkeley Bay Area community, of the work that reconnects. And there was music and ritual and silences and ways for people to come in and out of the space and to, touch this very sensory ritual that made sense for who this woman was and for the impact she made on her community. And part of what I noticed about it, as someone who'd been to a fair amount of funerals this year, was just the extent, or death rituals and ceremonies, was the extent to which they were creating a new ritual from old pieces.
Right.
And the community could do it, and they got it, and they could lean into it. And no one had ever created anything quite like it before. And they did. The community did. And like hundreds and hundreds of people experienced it. And that was so moving to me that, like, yeah, we can create these new old rituals. There's so much that we can, and it felt very, very, very authentic. It didn't feel mix and match. And like, it really felt true to this person and this place and these people and how they are coming together. And I think that's very rare. And it's a testimony not just to her and her life, but to the people, and I was not amongst them, who created this and who came together and who had done enough work with ritual and done enough work together and done, some people were strangers, some people have worked together for many years, to uplift and to create this space of honoring of death. And, honoring of death is some of the most important pieces of how we live and how we human ourselves, right? Death and loss and grief. It's part of how we regenerate, is through engaging with that more fully, and being with that which is falling apart. How do we be with that which is falling apart even as things are coming together? It's just one of those old questions. So one of the questions I like asking for myself and others is, what is life teaching me in this, and what can I learn in all of these pieces? And how is my spirit, how is spirit guiding me? And, of course, with death, it's a reminder that, I too will die. And it's a reminder of I too, like my own, I'm in the middle of my life, what I hope is the middle of my life. I don't actually know when I will die. So it might be the middle of my life. And what does it mean for me to prepare for the end of my life? And to think about death. And am I living, the corollary of that question is, am I living the life I want to live?
Right.
And right. And they kind of go side by side. Those two questions go side by side. And, there was a while, and I think this is still true, like Krissy's very into supporting people having succession plans. And that was one of the things that we did this year, is we both made sure that our banks were, that there's clearly, that it's like very clear where any money that we have goes to, right? Some very basic stuff. But we're in a time where it just feels like, yes, let's look at death some, as part of living, and also and then that corollary, like, am I doing the work in the life that I want, and, and how am I experiencing the vitality of life? Am I living fully? And I don't always like that question, actually, but it feels stressful. But where am I seeing the fullness of life, and how am I engaging in it, right? And like the extent to which we've been held by the land and the strawberries and the sunflowers and the waterfalls that I have been able to participate alongside. And I have more waterfalls this year than I've had in many years. And there was a major ritual I experienced for myself under a waterfall, which was entirely unexpected. Of stepping into another level of leadership and teaching, which I feel and yet every time this happens, there's like this greater humility, like, oh, I had to get closer to the earth somehow. I had to, even as space opens, or as invitations open, it kind of comes alongside with this, the humbleness of it.
Yeah.
And those tensions. So those big questions, and that's, I think, death and change, right? Destruction of things. Also, they all evoke what's it that really matters, and they bring up these questions of what really matters for an individual, for your family, for society, for your attention, for our attention.
I like the last bit. What calls your attention? That sense of lifing, as Nora Bateson would say, and movement, and to where do we bring our attention? And certainly death, befriending our in death, that sense for me of grief as a skill to be cultivated every day. And you've been in the midst of that, living it out, and the kind of vibrancy, in the wake of your year, of many deaths. There's a sense of you poised for this year in the active learning, not knowing there'll be mystery around it, but there's a sense of an active sense of the growing human being you continue to be with your attentions on the things that matter in all the ways that they have, and more so.
I want to, I think we're coming to the end of our time, but I want to kind of highlight a little bit more, a couple of big picture pieces. As you were talking about, like, death and loss, my heart goes to the many people who have experienced such horrific experiences of death and loss this year, at the scale of genocides, at the scale of mass deportations, which is so hard to wrap one's head around in so many ways. Even, and I have several friends and colleagues who are on variations of front lines in some of that work, and whose lives have been completely transformed this year as they've rearranged their lives to try to be of support to people who are experiencing various forms of harassment, and violence, and walking alongside them, and various friends and some of my clients are themselves trans, or working in trans communities, and sort of walking alongside them as they've experienced levels of fear and anxiety and concern and worry and anger, all those emotions, and witnessing their confusion, sometimes not confusion, but just the pain of it, right? And the importance of us not leaving each other, of learning what walking alongside means. It's like, what does it mean to show up? What does it mean to step back? What does it mean to engage? What does self-care look like? What does communal care look like? And so often those are side by side, and they're not necessarily separate. And sometimes they're really different. And so kind of working with folks as they've been engaging with those questions, and as well as, some amazing victories and wonderful things have happened this year, obviously. But kind of pointing as well to some of these, I mentioned in the beginning that some big assumptions have been shifted and challenged. And I wrote a long list of them, which I'm not going to go through right now. But it's kind of worth, I grew up in a world where secularism was assumed to be true, like assumed to be the dominant way of thinking, the currency, like science was a currency of knowledge and exchange in so many ways. And we have a very technologically advanced and scientific society, and the impact of the massive defunding of science, of the census, which I think might not seem very important, but has very big implications, of medical and medicine, like research, right? And of these big picture things that rely upon science and secularism are no longer, many things are not being funded. Many careers and jobs and livelihoods that were assumed to be like good jobs are no longer good jobs. The extent to which the United States is no longer a place where people, the kind of the ideal place to go, especially for academic work. And the extent to which there's already a brain drain. So the shift from a secular scientific society, which, by the way, I have both been a part of that scientific society. I have very firm, as a social scientist, but, social science is, and humanities, well, social science in particular is based on a lot of scientific assumptions, and thinking about data and how you engage with data, what data matters. It's hard to express how big of a shift it is to have to what extent are all those questions less relevant? And meanwhile, what we're seeing rising is this religious, particularly Christian nationalist way of thinking, in which is very particular understandings of gender, very particular understandings of what's good and what's bad, what is violence, what is appropriate punishment, what should be punished, what should not be punished, what should be upheld. It's not just the strict, male, the limitation of a binary perspective. It's also, alongside that comes all sorts of thoughts about what is fatherhood, what is motherhood, what is the role of the family, and it's suddenly particular interpretate. How do you interpret sacred texts like the Bible becomes a really, really, really nationally important question. And how do you understand the history of the Crusades? And like suddenly the Crusades are important again in a way that's like, it's been under the surface, but it's certainly informed much of US and European policy for, a long time, but it's like risen to the surface again. How do you engage with people who are reading and different news than you are and interpreting the news different than you do? And you don't have the same set of data, and you don't have the same set of assumptions. And what does community building look like when you're working with a different set of assumptions about what information matters, as well as what realities you're living in? And there's so much that happened this year in terms of legislative shifts and everything. $1 billion is going to be going to ICE this year in 2026. That's a lot of helicopters. That's the amount of money. the extent to which the clean energy was economically more viable in 2025 than, gas and oil across the world. And yet, the Trump ordered a coal power plant to not be closed down. I mean, it didn't make much news because there's so many other things happening, but he's actually interfering with a private company's decision to close down a coal mining, I think this was in Colorado, that wasn't working because he's trying to prop up this oil and gas industry, which by basic economic free market capitalist, processes is ready to expire. And it's like, oh, this is not an administration. This is not a moment when it's about what makes economic viable sense, because what makes economic viable sense would actually be for green energy to just like run to the forefront right now. This is the first year when I think in the US more energy has come from green energy sources. And I'm not saying that there aren't problems with solar panels. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the way it's happening is the way it should happen. But the extent to which like all the other countries around the world are going for a push in green technology because it's seen as an economically viable road, whereas oil and gas is not, and coal. And yet, so the US is making all of these changes, they're going backwards instead of forwards from a pure economic perspective. Like, so there's these things that are happening right now in which, and like the loss of FEMA, right? Or the cutting of FEMA, the cutting of some of these administrative positions in the federal government. I suspect a lot more money will be, I think there will be disaster assistance for those places that in some ways are loyal to Trump. I don't think we've seen that happen yet, but I think it's going to be happening this year. And at a greater level than it's happened before. Okay, I'm going to,
curious. Yeah, just to, because I think what I'm hearing you say is anything that you thought you could rely on assumptions, call it economic good sense or not, because people will have differing opinions, thoughts around that.
Right.
But anything that you thought had something, and I heard this when I was that way in September, and I heard such similar stories that in as much you've had this year full of all of these different things, different experiences, and on the very close level, but in your wider community in the land of Turtle Island, you're seeing a kind of massive change, even if it's kind of you've been keeping your eye on it. And I was curious whether you've drawn or whether that's a lived circular calendar, these changes. Because I have a sense of you tracking them, maybe in a way that you haven't before. So it's point pertinent, and it's a potent time to be, because day-to-day life can, if you're not being actually touched by it, can you leave you not noticing. And I think what I'm hearing you say is you're paying attention and you're noticing, and what questions it raises for you as you proceed in your work and in your connections with people and community. It is something to bring to bear.
It's really important. We live a relatively quiet life. My job is not to be is not a reporter. So my job is like I pay attention, and then I don't pay attention, and I do pay attention, and I don't pay attention. And sometimes I totally miss some stuff in the news, and then I don't. And then I pay more attention. So for me, this year in the circular time process, it was very important to go back and see some of what has happened. And I kind of like did some extra research. I kind of like did some overview pieces, like, okay, so what's going on here? What's going on here? Just to kind of get a better sense, partly because so much did happen, and also because I know I'm not paying attention to it like every day. Some people are and Krissy's actually much better at that than I am. But like, I'm not like on the news every week. And I have a couple of podcasters who I listen to who are much more than I am. Even like, the loss of the comedians is hugely, hugely significant. like it's huge and significant. And because for many people, like, political commentary, comedic commentary is a major way of engaging with the news.
Yeah.
And that's been true for many years for many people. So the loss of those comedians and that kind of a bang in advance has been very disappointing. It's been a tremendous loss, and there's a grief that comes with all the losses. I know a friend of mine works within the federal government. She's lost so many of her colleagues this year, and she's watched the morale just like plummet, and she like has watched what she and most of her colleagues who are professional, really they've spent their life preparing for these jobs often, and they have a lot of expertise in their fields, like watching decisions being made that are not helpful to the goal of that department as it was understood for a long time. Um, and so I don't want to say everything you can't trust, right? But for many people, it's worth it to take some time to look at what has happened that more or less influences your fields, and to take a bigger picture to kind of expand your sense of what your fields are a little bit wider than you might normally do, to try to say, okay, so what's influencing my sector and my sphere of work right now? And what does that mean for the work I'm trying to do and for how I do it? Because a lot of reimagination is going to have to happen. Um, and, uh, uh, and then where are the avenues to influence shifts and changes? And those are different questions. They're related questions. They're very hard sometimes to answer. And sometimes it really feels like, oh, there isn't. There aren't. Sometimes I feel like there are not avenues to influence shifts and changes the way that there may have been maybe in the past, depending upon who you are and where you're standing and what you're trying to do. And so it's like, okay, what do we do in that case? What do we do in that case? And I think it's really important to talk about it. Like, so much has happened so fast, like there hasn't been much processing time. What does it mean to have, like to have defunded X, Y, and Z? Like, right? What's the implications of this
The
for
rate
for
of change
schools?
is huge.
The rate of change is
Yeah,
so fast, right? Like we don't
yeah,
have
and
like
talks about
they
that.
they defunded the weather, right? So like our ability to understand what's happening just geologically in the weather is like less than it used to be. So that has a huge impact, right? Um, anyway, so taking time as organizations and individuals and families to kind of like, okay, like let's do a little bit of processing about what's some of these big things and what did they mean and what does that look like while things continue to change can be really, really hard. And so,
Yeah,
like
and can be
finding,
really sustaining. If if
yeah, very draining, very draining. And, if I don't know, maybe I should do more reflections on those big picture things this year. And if people
I
want
was
me to do
saying
that,
that
they should tell me.
I was saying sustaining, actually the giving the time, when it's impossible, it is impossible.
Yeah.
And yet the coherence, or like you talked about, what happened at the Rematriation Council, the feeding of something in the
Hmm.
slowing down, in the bearing witness, um, their acts as sustaining in a troubled time,
Hmm. Yeah.
strengthening communities to in the face of a huge rate of change, that nothing is very predictable and possibilities are still there.
Yes. Yes. Oh, very much. And constantly changing,
Yeah.
constantly shape shifting right now. And it's, it's it's somewhere between exhausting and exciting, right? Like, Like, and it's many, many different things for many people, but yeah, I guess a question I call this period of time our seed sorting time, when we are this moment in the year in winter when I'm looking at my different seeds and kind of and I got this image from Krissy. This is not a seed planting time in this ecosystem. We're not like putting our intention and energy into planting seeds. We are looking at the seeds, right? And that's part of what this conversation is. And so one of the C's is like, how do you who are listening to this podcast and you who are engaging with me in different ways, what would you like us to do? And like, what are the places you want us to go? We're very influenced by that. I am very influenced by that. Like, what type of sense making is going to be helpful? Because we're in a place where, a lot's happening. And what types of questions and inquiries into sense making is going to be most helpful. I think that's one of the seeds, the seed of sense making, and amidst a lot happening, sense making amidst overwhelm, like is one of the seeds, right? And how do we work with fear is another seed. And how do we work with how do we engage with and hold the ancient and the new, the old patterns of violence that are not new at all, and this particular form, and the ways of celebration. And there's been so much good celebration too this year, so much also worth celebrating, how that interweaves amongst fear and destruction and pain and fear and anxiety. Like one of the influences of those fires in last January is that this past December, I spent a great deal of time with my mom finding a new insurance company for her that would insure her house in California, because most of the California insurance companies like State Farm and the Farmers Insurance, the big ones, have left. They're no longer insuring homes in California, especially around that have fire risk, which is a lot of people.
Yeah.
And we found a company that's like, I don't know, do we like it that much? Not, I don't know if we really like it that much. Like, we would have been quite happy to stay with the folks who we were with. And and that, and she, as an older woman, who is turning 80 this month, she who is not good at technology, right? She's not good at opening her computer and going online, and they have all these online health platforms. She can never figure out how to log on. She loses her logon password all the time. She's great at lots of other things, but anything resembling computers is not her strong point. And, everything they send her is via platforms and via huge PDFs, and she's not sure how to open them. And so I really had to sit with, had to help her. And we brought in multiple people to help her. And I've been really increasing, just in general, like the last few years, building the enabling community around this one particular person, my mother, to support her as she gets older and becomes less capable of doing what she used to do so easily. And so our friend got insurance, whatever, a year ago for his house. And because of the Los Angeles fires, which were far away from where our friends live in Northern California, like the place that he got his new insurance from is no longer insuring new homes. Right. And it was just like in this very short period of time. And that's a huge, like, insurance is like a major financial thing. And many people can't even own their house if it's not insured. Right. So there's all these layers and layers and layers. And obviously, so much of the answer is in community and support, but it's also in these bigger questions of sense making and seed sorting. And what are we resourcing ourselves into? What are we sourcing? By resourcing, I mean to resource is to source yourself into something, right? That is resourceable. And much of what people have relied upon for their source, like, has been various forms of which have been defunded. So then what does that mean? Yeah, so these are questions we're in the midst of. These are questions we're in the midst of. And meanwhile, it's, a very beautiful day today here in the Hudson Valley. And that's also, like, we are not alone on this planet asking these questions in a vacuum.
And life is still there to be fed.
Yes, ancestors are there to be fed. Future generations are there to be fed. The sacred texts are there to be listened to and reinterpreted. Like, there's much to support us now, as there always has been.
So the piece I wanted to pick up on is about, you were kind of talking at the end about rematriation, and that gathering was also the last time that I saw Sally Rose Wagner, and of course I couldn't have known. I did know she was sick. When I saw her, it was very clear that she was not well. I didn't know. No one. We never know, right? She could have lived for. I had no idea that she was that close. She died a couple months later. And she was such an important figure. And like, so this question, like, what is life teaching you? And at first I was particularly devastated about her death, not only because she was such an important figure in my life, but because I felt I had missed out on a deeper connection with her. Like, she knew me, we knew each other. She had some idea of my work. I think I had some idea of hers. And we both kept intending to spend more time together, and we didn't. And even during that conference, we had talked about getting together the next day or a couple of days, like within those next few days, since I was out in that area. She lives in the Syracuse region. Sally Rose Wagner was someone who rewrote the history of feminism. She brought to the world's greater understanding the role that Haudenosaunee Confederacy women played in the history of what we think of with the feminist movement today, the women's suffrage movement, and the extent to which white women learned from their indigenous female counterparts, and particularly through her studies of one particular early suffragette, Matilda Gage. And Sally also lived a life. She didn't just do the historical research. She lived a life that echoed this Matilda Gage's life in some interesting ways. And that was built on a friendship, on some very deep and very purposeful friendships with particularly women from different parts of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy over decades, 40 years of friendships and relationality and co-creation. And I don't think even though I'd met her multiple times and we'd had some really good conversations, it wasn't until her funeral that I came to understand. I did go to her funeral many months later in the fall, how important, not just how important she was, but the web of relationships that she had been able to be a part of. And that and that many other people have been able to be some other people have been able to be a part of. And I can reckon, like, kind of like after her passing, I was like recognizing, like, maybe she might have been able to be a better she might have been able to mentor me in ways that I didn't realize I needed mentoring. And I didn't look for, right? And I'm often very confident in what I do. And I still am very confident in what I do. But I think I've, there's also been like, oh, like where are those places that I can receive more mentorship? And there's something about the passing of many elders, as well as people who are younger than me. And that feeling of, oh, okay, like I am still in that period of my life where there are elders and there are people who can also support me. And I don't totally mean that age-wise, because I support a lot of people who are older than me, and I am supported by people who are older than me. But there is an age component to it as well. And there is like, oh yeah, like, no, I'm in my 40s. I can, there are definitely, and so I've made a point in this year as a whole, of like, okay, like who do I need to spend more time with? Like who are the people, men and women, who I want to make sure I'm spending some extra time with now while they're still with us. And certainly that was a question that I had before now, and that was a question I've had for a long time. But I feel like it's taken on a particular flavor. And I think I've looked at Sally's work in a different way, and I've come to understand her life better. And through understanding her life better, I've come to understand this bigger piece of work better, and the bigger work that we are all doing better. And it's so annoying, I guess, how sometimes we don't see those bigger pictures until something like a funeral or something big happens, and at the same time, I've been consoled and supported by a lot of people who've said, you have to trust. You had what you needed in the moment. You have to kind of trust some of those bigger movements of life. Like she and I both reached out to each other, and neither of us were ever able to make it work in terms of connecting more. Like we both tried, and it didn't work in the time that we had, or we weren't able to make that coming together happen. And so that one also has to. I've tried to also. I mean, clearly, I still have some regret, but I've also tried to be at peace with like, I got a tremendous amount out of what interactions we did have, and she has now entered that other world, the world beyond this one, and I have many really strong relationships with people in that other world. So, like, she can continue to be one of those people. I can continue to build a certain type of relationship, although it's not the same. So it feels important to lift her name up, and to lift up this kind of, like seeing her, spending a little bit of time with her. She said some things to me in that gathering that were very, very important to me and have stayed with me. And then her death, and then going to her funeral, which is maybe the only funeral I've been to where Indigenous women entered a church building to sing for her, to speak for her and to sing for her, and to honor her as her being a white woman. And it's very rare. It happens, but it's rare. It's not common. And to kind of get a better sense of where she was coming from, just a tiniest bit of a better sense of where she was coming from. And that, I think, really influenced me in rereading one of her books, Sisters of Spirit, which I teach in my Remembering course, and subsequently ordering a bunch of the books and bringing them with me to the powwow where you were with us in that powwow. And I now just am starting to just stock her books so that I can, help other people receive them. and they were the fastest thing that sold. Those books sold faster than anything else that we had on our book table. And so many people wanted to hear those stories. And I would share with anyone who would listen a little bit about her life and a little bit about the stories that she has helped to uncover and be a part of. And so there's this way in which, when people move into that beloved ancestry space, like we who are left get to carry on their work as best as we can. And that includes seeing ourselves in relationship to it in a different way.
Yeah, there is still relational fields. I mean, I kind of am humbly honored that you're not just speaking to a name in a book, that actually I sat and read that book. I think after I left, or maybe when I was with you, that book I read, I was smitten and gotten and awed and given another lens to look. I kind of like was with that. Oh, wow. Okay. That insights, and I've been sharing some of her stories, since I've been back here. So to feel that sense that you have of, you did miss something. She was almost, she was around the corner, metaphorically or whatever, and you did miss her, and that is the way of it. And missing and loving, and that kind of sense of grief in the going, and the carrying, and the still relational, all feels. But you saying that, I need to bring her in, and me having shared, sat with her through her writings and her humility. I loved the piece where she talked about recognizing what she'd missed. So she was a teacher for many years, and that role modeling of, I was teaching this, and there was so much I didn't know, and her, that learning was captivating for me, that willingness to bear witness to what she came to know and what she came to live and relate to, that she didn't have initially. It was so significant.
And that again, it's another piece where it's like, through telling different stories and through living different stories ourselves, we create different realities. Even as, like, I think that, the face of feminism is changing. Like, what is needed now is not what was needed then. In the face of what our earth needs and what we are needed, how we are needed, is also in a process of both the same and also changing. And I think the stories that she helped to tell are a part of that, a really important part of that.
Yeah, I feel that. So
yeah. Well, that was all. That was the piece I think I wanted to add. It's so interesting to me. Like, I've noticed, like, oh, it's very. I think I've done a pretty good job of weaving in the different pieces, and yet it's easy to just, when you're talking about death, to really think about death and what death means. And it's easy when you're talking about politics to talk about politics, and it's easy, it is actually quite difficult to go in between all these. And I thought I would talk a bit more about, how I see feminism shifting or something like that, right? But it does feel like this is the right thing. I've said enough, more than enough, for this little episode.
I mean, the themes are capturing, and there's the, this is still your reflection. Like, each month, each part, each aspect stirs that you're recognizing those kind of meta connections and themes, both which you've been working with for years, some of which are new, some of which are new experiences, and the carrying forward that you're living through, you're living with as you reflect. So that dance between those two layers, for me, is quite a thing to navigate. And I had my attention as I listened, and just trying to check, how does this fit with the circular calendar, the reflection, and the life that surges through you as you look at these things. The connections grow, the threads get made and woven.
So I think it feels like we've come to the end of this part of this thing today, this sharing. And thank you, Gayano, for your listening. You're such a generous and beautiful listener. And your willingness to sit alongside me in this time. I felt like sitting again. Like, okay, feels like sitting now. And and I'm just curious, as we kind of bring this time together to a close, what are there any kind of, I don't know, reflections or pieces you're wanting to bring up or to take with you as you go forward?
I mean, there's much. There's the re-inspiration of the circular calendar and the remembering in my body of when I walk it. And there's the bits of me that don't do that. So there's something about the being, I was going to say allowed, being in the good fortune of sitting alongside you in the remembering and in the arc of times. There's many, the most visceral is that sense of you living out something of the 3-day conference you attended in February, and that kind of visceral remembering, the visceral remembering that happened around Krissy's son's death rituals. You know, those are, they're possibilities that people don't even, or they're living qualities, they're not possibilities, they're alive. And for many people, that's not even seen as possible. So there's something about willingness to remember and to speak to. And I guess it's a kind of a deep invitation to the intensity of being alive for many people right now, including myself. You know, how I will come away from this stirred into action. There's something about the actual and the seed sorting. I really appreciate that reminder, that sense that there's work to be done, and it's not onerous, and it includes the neededness of others, that skill, reskilling myself in neededness. Yeah, it will continue to work through me as possibilities do. It doesn't end as we say goodbye.
Right. As closures without endings. I think I want to lean into this notion of remembering our capacity as edgewalkers. Because, when I am attending or participating in Indigenous-led gatherings within communities I'm close to or not close to, I'm always very conscious I'm not trying to become Indigenous, right? And I know people who work with me, and you know this obviously. And I am very interested in shape-shifting what it means to be a settler here and telling stories of interbeing. And a lot of our origin stories work is telling different stories of interbeing. And the work I want to do around 250 is there's ways of telling what it means to be a settler here that's different. That's not the stories I grew up with. And that enables new possibilities to arise. It's not about appropriation, but is walking alongside and learning from and being in reciprocity with traditional communities here in these lands, as well as with my own people, where my people come from.
It sounds to me like a kind of
so
quality of reckoning and accountability too.
Yeah, exactly. With that edge walking, I think the Because it does, I feel with many people who work with me, I'm often working with edgewalkers, and certainly working with your folks, your community in Wales and England, and to a lesser extent, I'm sure, I feel like I want to add other parts of Europe and Scotland and Ireland too, um, that this is not work that only Americans are doing, or that only people in settler countries are doing, that there are so many pieces of this that are across the pond and across many oceans and many rivers, and that are being done in different ways by many different peoples, and that we have so much to learn from each other, and that many of us are edge walking, and going between hedges and plains and fields and forests, and relearning different ways of working with both our metaphorical and actual landscapes, and tending to large ecosystems, to large forests, and not just to garden plots.
Yes.
And that's part of our invitation in these times. So, and that work becomes both more important and more tremulous. And let us not assume that the past doesn't repeat itself. It rhymes, but it doesn't repeat. And even as it echoes, like the echoes can be painful. But so much is not only, there's so much richness right now. So hold those seeds with care. Thank you.
And thank you for the I was thinking just as you spoke, the waterways. I remember that with you. It's so easy to think about landscapes and not waterscapes. And I was really grateful to have that reminder of the fullness of our earth and the many ways in which we live with her.
And we are of the water.
We are of the water.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Remembering and Reenchanting podcast. If you are enjoying what you are hearing, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review. I am always happy to hear from you, dear listener, to continue finding ways to connect the disconnected and go deeper on your own journey of remembering and reenchanting with your communities, your organizations, and your families. I invite you to check out our courses and other community offerings via the Sequoia Summit Via website. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Though I must admit I spend much more time working with really amazing people than crafting social media. If you want to work with me one-on-one or bring me to speak at your organization or family office, you can find out more at sarajolena.com.